tardes, San Diego. Tijuana in the house. Wow, these lights. ¿Qué pasó, Carla? So check it out. My family's all out getting tacos. I was like, dude, everybody's in the line. They're going to miss the thing. I don't know what to tell you about all this. I have pals here from high school, and I was just sitting over there with Denise saying, who could have guessed this, man? Back in high school, you know, I wanted to be a writer from the get-go, and when I was in high school, I didn't really know how one did this. I didn't think people like me were going to be authors. I didn't know that I had access to making books, but I wanted to do it really badly. And I had heard stories all my life. I was telling a story yesterday. I went down to Logan Heights, to the Logan Heights Library. When I lived in Logan Heights, 3935 National Avenue, by the way, there was no library, right? There was no library. And I was there's a Starbucks, man. What happened to my and people were like, did you notice there's joggers down there? I was like, I know, back in my day, if you were jogging, you were being pursued by cops. But now, Starbucks, library, joggers. It was really interesting. But, you know, I told them this story. My family will know this, but people always ask me, where did this stuff come from? And it came from two sources, I think. One was my mother, who was American, as you heard. And my dad, he had a whole other vibe. My mother wanted me to know literature, and she would read to me at night. And she started out with Dickens. My first author was Charles Dickens. And I had no idea what the heck she was talking about. I came out of Tijuana talking Tijuana, you know? And I was in the barrio, and we were all like talking like that. And I confessed at Logan Heights that I didn't get the calo right. I didn't get the slang right. Like our black neighbors were calling people cat in those days. So I thought vato loco was gato loco. Right? Hey man, check out the gato loco. But my mother would read me stories at night, and she began with Charles Dickens. And I would go to sleep kind of drunk on words, right? Listening to these words, I didn't get it. But I loved it. And the first author I really connected with was Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. And I thought, wow, you know, this guy, he's dead, he's ancient, I don't know anything about this guy, but he was connecting with me in a deep sense. And after that was Rudyard Kipling, the Jungle Books. I was Mowgli, right? I was the Jungle Boy. Now my dad was watching this stuff, and he wasn't too sure what to do about this. He saw me slipping away from being Mexicano. My mother didn't ever learn Spanish. My mother always called me Louis. Louis. She also called me dear boy. And she was from her family was originally from Virginia, and they'd gone up into New York. So she always thought she was in the junior league, even in Logan Heights. Always had her little white gloves, you know, and she always wore her sensible little black dress. And she had this pose I call the teapot, where she would always stand like this. And she would move her hand. And we had demitasse cups, all this weird stuff, right? And, you know, I remember my grandmother coming from Tijuana, and she couldn't figure out why the gringos drank coffee in little tiny baby doll cups, the little demitasse. So my dad was watching this stuff, and he was trying to combat it with Mexican culture. If you'll forgive me one slight curse word, he used to call me, of course, Luis. Luis! That's what it sounded like all the time. Luis! Or cabrón. That was my other name. Oh, cabrón. Sí, papa, right? So he was trying to combat the Americanization of Luis with Mexican culture. And that was Pedro Infante, Agustín Lara, right? Cantinflas, Viruta y Capulina. Do you remember Viruta y Capulina? Oh, man. And, but he wanted me to read. And he was having a little trouble in Tijuana finding kid books that weren't comic books. He didn't like comic books. He didn't like Calimán. I like Calimán comic books. You probably don't even know them anymore. But he wanted to find books. So he would go to Tijuana every Thursday to see our grandma, his mom, my grandma. And he would come back, and he'd bring me little stuff, He'd bring me, a plaster skull, or bull horns, the Tijuana stuff. And so one day he came home, and he always smoked Pall Malls. And my father liked big gestures, and he came in with 2 books. And he walked in, and he slammed them on the table. He said, Luis, Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. Takes a cigarette hit, he says, study it in the original Spanish. Órale, papá. Right? Dad representing, man. My dad loved Mexico so much, everything good ever invented was Mexican. We got a colored TV. Remember those when you first got them and you adjust the rabbit ears and put a little foil on them and everybody's orange and green on there? But he'd get it just right. And he says to me, Mijo, ¿te gusta la tele a colores? Mexicano invented that. Go to the laundromat. You like the dryer? Mexicanos invented everything. Sputnik went over in the 50s. Mijo, they stole that. Russians stole that from Mexico. He also used to tell me that my grandfather, Papa Juan, had constructed the United States. He takes me to the Grand Canyon, and we're looking into it, He says, why, mijo? That's big. I said, hijo, papá, pues, it's big. And he says, sí. Tu Papa Juan, he dug that out with some buckets. Painted desert. ¿Sabes qué? Tu Papa Juan, he wore himself out painting that sand. I was like, wow. Now people, my brothers and sisters are here, my nieces and nephews. People ask us why so many of us look Irish. So I just wanted to throw this out, because I got to tell you, I go all over the country talking to people, and sometimes people respond a little funny, because, when my first book came out, my first tour took me to El Paso, El Chuco, Texas, and they'd never seen me before. All they knew was this book by a guy named Luis Alberto Urrea, originally from Tijuana. And they got a Chicano poet, Benjamin Alire Sainz, to introduce me. And there were all these guys from Juarez, the Mexican vaqueros with the little tiny boot. They had little tiny cowboy boots and big belt buckles. And they had the beers wrapped up in napkins, and they were drinking them leaning over with their nalgas out like this, right? Cowboy hats. One of them was named Juan because his arm said Juan, and his belt buckle said Juan. And I was in the audience, and Ben Sainz gets up and he's like, Mi raza is a man of the border, hijo de la frontera, voz fronteriza, un escritor chicano, Luis Urrea. And the Mexican people went crazy. And they're, and they're stomping their boots and they're shaking the chair. Mira, ¿ves? Raza linda. So they're raising Cain, and I walk up, and this is what happened. They're like, I will never forget it. And they're looking at each other like, ¿y este qué la frega? But there was this weird moment when they were all like, no, it's okay. So here's the secret key to my family's genetics. Our grandma in Tijuana was named Guadalupe Murray. Por eso, little red-haired, blue-eyed Irish lass. And I tell you that because people want to know where the humor in this book comes from. Come on, man. Right? We're funny, aren't we? People forget how funny we are because we're alive. So I always say this about writing, because I don't only have a short time to talk to you, and then we're going to do an interview, but I feel like laughter in particular is a virus that infects everybody with humanity. If we sit down together and laugh about something or cry about something, it's impossible for the people who dislike you to then say, you're subhuman, I don't like you anymore. You've looked in each other's eyes and you've shared something, and it changes stuff. That's why the books are funny. It's not a funny story necessarily, but it's funny. I wanted to laugh out loud telling it. I want to tell you a couple of little things about where Elle's story came from. Sure, Homero el Mexicano with the Iliad and the Odyssey. That was good. My mom's stories, that was good. But these folks here can tell you, much of my writing comes from our tia Leti. La Flaca. Tia Flaca. Everybody has one. Even in Iowa, somebody's had a skinny aunt. And Tia Flaca sort of blind in one eye from the diabetes. Fumando, she smoked all the time, menthol cigarettes, Had cat eye glasses. And she used her stories. I don't know, my brother Octavio up here in front, Luis Octavio, might remember this. People want, like, where did the hummingbird's daughter come from? I can tell you exactly where it came from. Tia Flaca telling us insane stories in Tijuana. Rampa Independencia. In the dark, with a kerosene heater going. The little green tower of glass with this flame, and it was going like this. And we're in complete darkness. And she thinks a Christmas story is designed to terrify the children, right? And I still remember the story that she appeared over the heater with the light in her face, smoking, and she says, your Papa Juan in Culiacan was riding his horse late at night. It's midnight. And he's going by the cemetery, and there's a beautiful girl standing in front of the cemetery. We're like, ay, beautiful girl. And she said, sí. And your Papa Juan said to her, señorita, es muy peligroso estar aquí tan tarde. Would you allow me to give you a ride to Culiacan into safety? So, ay, muy amable, señor. So your Papa Juan got off the horse, and he helped the girl onto the horse, and he climbed aboard and began riding. And he thought, oh, I'm a lucky man. It's a pretty girl, I'm saving her. So he decided to say a piropo. Now, everywhere I go, people don't know piropos. So if you don't know piropos, are our fine art of saying dashing things to women so that we're irresistible. Like, I take your hand and I say, I did not know lilies bloomed this early in the year. So, Papa Juan is riding with the girl and he decides to say some piropo. But here's Tia Leti, right? So your Papa Juan turned around to say something beautiful to the muchacha, pero ya no era muchacha. She was now a skeleton with a hideous skull with fangs that was going to bite his throat. And then she's like, Merry Christmas, cabrones. Like, oh my God. That's where story came from, Tia Flaca. So she would tell us that, we had a yaqui aunt who could fly. That's where Hummingbird's daughter came from. That's it. So this story came from my tia Irma, who was Tia Flaca's sister. And my siblings can tell you she was the scariest human being ever born. She was Mexico's women's bowling champion. And she would bowl with your skull if she wanted to. It's mean. There's a scene in the book where someone says to Aunt Irma, I don't feel so well. And she says, you've been dying for 15 years. Why don't you die? That was Irma talking to my mother. Ya tienes 15 años muriéndote. Muérete ya. I know. But I want to say with great love about Tia Irma, she died, I guess, last year, or maybe the year before, about 95 years old, while bowling. Right? Right on. Go, Tia. That's the way to go. I hope I keel over while typing. Oi! Check out. So I just want to tell you very briefly, got 5 minutes? See, I've got my director here, let me know. Tres Camarones does not exist. I named it Tres Camarones because it's stupid. I thought it would be funny. It's based on Rosario, Sinaloa, where my family's from. Tacho. Now, the nice ladies in book clubs around the country, they always have us over, and they always make me a bowl of beans and a margarita. I'm so sick of bowls of beans. I'm like, somebody give me sushi or something, right? But they always tell me, we just love that taco. I say, it's even not taco, it's tacho. That's based on a real young man. in, in Rosario. And the other one people love is Atómico. If you haven't read the book, he's a badass cholo, right? You like Atómico? Yo soy Atómico. Pues qué? Pues qué, morra? Hazme daño, morra. That's what he's always saying to people. I just wanted to throw out quickly because we have to do our interview. But Atómico, I always tell those people in the book club, you know, my theory is working. Because I swear to God, if Atómico walked in here from the Tijuana garbage dump with his fighting staff, tatuajes, shaved head, bandana around his... Ladies, you would not be happy. You wouldn't give him a cucumber sandwich or a bowl of beans. You'd run. But you read him in a book and you love him. These guys can tell you, Atómico was inspired by our cousin Hugo. Hugo was the pistolero. He still lives on Rampa Independencia. So if you're in Tijuana, watch yourself. But Hugo was always a prankster. He was always the tough guy in the family. And there's a little bit in the book. I always say this because of KPBS. He would watch KPBS in Tijuana, and he saw Toshiro Mifune samurai movies. He saw Yojimbo, and he saw the Seven Samurai. So he decided he was Tijuana's first samurai warrior. And that's where the inspiration for that guy came from. So, you know, it's a great honor for me to be back home. It's incredible to see you all here. I'm so grateful. We're in the middle of a long summer of touring. We just came down from Aspen, beat the fires, and we're on our way to Oregon after this. So I just thank you so much. I love you all, and thanks for reading it.